Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of History Bubble Armenia. Last episode I covered a horrific event that was the Armenian genocide and what the Ottoman Empire, especially one of the two competing governments, did to punish those who committed the act and how they tried to reintegrate the Armenians into their society. Armenia was not only ruled by one empire during the First World War. In fact, there was three, and the Ottoman Empire was not the only who had been sent to ruins by the war. Russia was also on its last legs, especially when in early 1917, when the emperor was overthrown and the so-called provisional government took power. But they had a hard time controlling all of their subjects, so gave many regions much autonomy. One of these was the Special Transcaucasian Committee, consisting of modern-day Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, and some occupied Ottoman territory. When the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, they became even more autonomous and broke off officially declaring themselves a nation early 1918 as the Transcaucasian Democratic Federation. They tried to make peace with the Ottomans, but when the Ottoman and the Caucasian Federation both wanted peace, they could not agree on the terms the other side. While the leader of the nation accepted the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, a treaty signed between the Russians and Ottomans, which made it so the Ottomans would give up all claims to the Caucasus but get back their occupied Anatolian part of the country, Transcaucasia was also able to be fully independent. Parliament in Tbilisi stated that it would remain in a state of war with the Ottoman Empire, but now without any Russian support. This was because the Armenian part of the Federation's government still saw these areas as Armenian homeland and had convinced many of the Georgian members that they could not give up these lands. The Ottomans quickly captured the Georgian city of Batumi and they seized the Karch, which was controlled by Armenians with the help of anti-Bolshevik Russians, but seeing that they would inevitably lose Kars, they surrendered. These Ottoman victories only made the Ottomans try to take more territory in the negotiations. The Ottomans continued into Armenian lands, conquering many cities in Armenia, with the Armenian army retreating. The Ottoman army, divided into three parts, had soon conquered most of eastern Armenia, forcing the Armenians to make a stand. There were three battles happening roughly at the same time. The Battle of Abaran, where the Armenians took a defensive stance and then counterattacked, throwing the Ottomans into retreat. The Battle of Karakilesa, where the Armenians gathered up soldiers from Karakilesa, and soon the Ottomans came and conquered the city and executed 4,000 of its citizens. Soon the two armies faced in a devastating raw battle, with the Armenians eventually coming out victorious, and the Battle of Sardarbad, for which many Armenian civilians started to join militias, while others started to help the army with supplies and transport, fearing what the Ottomans would do if they would enter the target, Yerevan, the capital of Armenia. The Ottomans defeated a smaller Armenian detachment out on its own before the main battle began, but the Ottomans were unable to break through the Armenian defenses. But soon they came again, but still could not break through, as the Armenians tried an offensive, but lost as the Turks started to entrench themselves. This pressured them to use more innovative measures, as a stalemate would probably go in the Turks' favors, as they had an easier time reinforcing, since they overall had more men. So while the Armenians launched a forward assault, they sent a few of their troops to flank their enemies, throwing them into disarray, leading to even this battle being an Armenian victory. Over the course of just 1 week, Armenia had been saved. But all was not good for the Armenians, as the Transcaucasian Federation was dissolved, as the Georgians left stating that people were not united and thus the country could not operate. They also most likely feared conflict with the Ottomans, and declaring independence could give them peace. 2 days later, the Azerbaijanis also declared independence, quickly followed by the Armenians. Even if these two other parts of the Federation barely had helped Armenians in the war, it was still a loss for Armenia. Soon after its independence, it was forced to sign the Treaty of Batumi, which forced Armenia to cede its second largest city, modern-day Gyumri, and territory only a few kilometers outside of Yerevan, which devastated the emerging nation even more. This treaty also limited their army and gave the Ottomans the rights to go through Armenia. The Armenians had also come into conflict with the Azerbaijanis, starting in the days of the Transcaucasian Federation, with the events called the March Days in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan. At that time of March 1918, Azerbaijani and Armenian militias, as well as some Russian Bolshevik forces, all existed in the city. Tensions ran high, but when a ship entered port with former Azerbaijani soldiers, the Bolshevik might have received information claiming these were soon to revolt and drive out the Soviets, so they went and disarmed them. There are other claims on exactly what happened, but most say that Armenians and or Bolsheviks disarmed the new government. But later, more Azerbaijani soldiers came to the city and fighting erupted, while at first the Dashnaks, Armenian Revolutionary Federation, tried to stay neutral, but soon joined the fighting on the side of the Soviets. The fighting was ruthless, and there were many civilian casualties, especially at the hands of the Dashnaks, and when the fighting finally ended, there were estimates of around 15,000 dead, with most being Azerbaijani civilians. This event was probably one of the main things leading to the Transcaucasian Federation's dissolution, and also made it so the Bolsheviks and Dashnaks had taken control of the Azerbaijani capital. This made Azerbaijan ask the Ottoman for help in reclaiming their capital, which they provided, so the joint Ottoman-Azerbaijani forces marched on Baku and started attacking, and after a bit of back and forth, they recaptured the city, because those defending it left, seeing that the situation was hopeless. This sadly led to the Turkic army plundering the city, and the massacre of Armenians that ensured was on par with that the Dashnaks had committed in the March days. Soon, the Ottomans officially left the World War, so it was mostly for the Armenians and Azerbaijanis to fight against each other, but it also removed the buffer between Armenia and Georgia, and both nations quickly tried to fill the void and occupy the territory, which led to disputes over who should hold it. This soon escalated to a war, and Armenians sent troops into Georgia. The Georgians, having failed to see the scale of the conflict, got steamrolled initially against the far numerically superior Armenian forces, but Georgians had a defender's advantage, and several armored trades, which halted Armenians enough so that they could build up an army and launch a counterattack. Now the Georgians won several smaller victories, but the conflict soon ended anyway, with no clear victor, so the disputed area became a neutral zone. But the war with Azerbaijan continued, mostly in the Sunyk province and the surrounding areas, and it seemed that Armenians had the advantage, but started to pull back as their allies, the UK, promised that they would find peace with the Ottomans, and which could solve even this conflict. But it did not, and mostly Azerbaijani population of what is now the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic rebelled against Armenia. But the Armenian army entered the new state and destroyed it. The Armenians could now enter western Azerbaijan and occupied most of what is now the Republic of Artsakh. They could do it quite easily, as the Azerbaijani government was on its last legs, with the eternal communist rebels, the Soviets in the north, and Armenians in the west, and it fell to the pressure and surrendered to the Soviets as they got word that they might attack. The Armenians used this opportunity to conquer even more lands in West Azerbaijan, as there were very little resistance. Meanwhile, the Turkish civil war had been going on, and the Allies were fighting the Turks, and with the Treaty of Sevres promised Armenia former Turkish lands. This was unacceptable to the Turkish National Movement or the Ankara government, so in response to this, Mustafa Kemal, the leader of the nation, declared war on Armenia. At first there were only small-scale skirmishes on the border, but soon the Turks started to advance into Armenia. The Armenians knew that they could not win on their own, so abandoned less favorable defensive positions and tried to hold out until support could come. The question was, what support? Most of the Allied powers had to deal with the newly conquered territory or with other parts of Turkey, so the Armenians tried to seek an agreement with the Soviets, which the main party, the Dashnaks, had already cooperated with in the past. The problem was that the Soviets were already supporting the Ottomans in the civil war as to fend off Western imperialism, but they still managed to get a minor agreement. But the Ottomans, with overwhelming numbers, could easily capture Kars and Gyumri. The Armenians now had to accept defeat and gave up all claims to former Ottoman territory and ceded to the Ankara government. They also had to cede some land to the now Soviet-controlled Azerbaijan. The Soviets now orchestrated a revolt in Yerevan and then sent in their army to capture the city. The Armenians, exhausted from all the war, and with most of the forces in the southern part of the country, could provide almost no resistance. The Soviets entered Yerevan, and Armenia effectively surrendered, and the First Armenian Republic ceased to exist. But the Dashnaks could not accept this, and later staged a rebellion that took control of Yerevan. But this could not last long, and soon the Soviets came in force and easily recaptured the city, making the Armenian Revolutionary Federation flee to modern-day Sunyk and Vaitorzor provinces, or the salient of Armenia. There they proclaimed the Republic of Mountainous Armenia. There were several months of intense fighting between Soviet Azerbaijani forces and Armenians, and the Armenians, seeing that they could not win, tried to get a semi-favorable terms while they were not entirely defeated. and managed to get the Armenian salient to be part of the Armenian SSR rather than the Azerbaijani SSR, as it was first planned. And with the death of mountainous Armenia, all the territory of the short-lived republic were either in the Soviet or Turks' hands, and Armenia was once again not an independent state. But at least this time they would not have to wait several centuries to get another one. That was all for today. Next time there will be a brief video on the Ankara government's perspective on the genocide, and then we'll see how Armenia had it under Soviet rule. See you then!